guest is none other than Professor Eugene A. Fitzgerald, CEO and Director of Singapore MIT Alliance for Research and Technology, Professor of Material Science. Welcome to the Big Idea, an event that is meant to inspire, educate, and pave the way for a more resilient future through our collaboration with MIT. Are you excited today? Considering innovation as a journey across an unexplored ocean, incremental innovation is like navigating close to the coastline, where the waters are calm and familiar, and the risks are minimized. However, to discover new lands and treasures, one must venture into the open sea, embracing the uncertainties of uncharted waters where market, applications, technology, and implementation challenges converge. Inside real innovation, challenges for corporation and university, Professor Fitzgerald will guide us on how to embark on such bold journeys. By working together in a third place, corporation and universities can become navigators. We believe your insights will greatly inspire and educate us, helping us navigate towards a more resilient and informative future. Welcome, Professor Eugene A. Fitzgerald.
It's a great pleasure to be here. I actually live currently in Singapore, so not that far away, so it's easy to come and see you. Those of you guys don't know, SMART is MIT's research corporation in Singapore, and it's the latest version of a long-term collaboration. In fact, I was one of the first people on the ground in Singapore in 1998 when the relationship with MIT was established. So I've actually been up to Malaysia a few times, and it's been great to visit initially for pleasure when I was in those early years, and then later going up to Penang to look at the new semiconductor fabs that were being built at that time. So it's great to be back here, tell you about that long journey, and give you insights that we have about the innovation process, right? And what I want to do today is kind of start and talk about, just like was said in the introduction, that we want to start by saying, hey, here's how we can think about innovation. We're closer to the coast, and this is how we operate in our comfort zone, right? But then I want to use that same thinking to look further out and say, okay, what does it mean? What are the implications for when we want to find new space, drastically new space for innovation? So that's going to be kind of the development that I'll do today. Now, I think some of you may look old enough that you may remember AT&T Bell Laboratories. Do you guys remember Bell Labs? It's a famous place in telecom space, right, that developed all sorts of basic things. It turns out that's where I started my career, when Bell Labs was still the monopoly laboratory, and we had all the resources we needed. And I'm going to talk about that because I know here at Telecom Malaysia, you can relate to that. But over my career, in those days, it was like the corporate world innovates, right? Now, if you visit the United States today, with the exceptions of a few companies like Google or something like that, almost nobody says that, right? Everybody says, all of this innovation comes from universities, right? So one thing I want to get across to you today is that it's never one place, right? I'm gonna talk to you about the long-term innovation process is a societal process. It actually involves many different organizations, and once you start thinking that way, the way you launch research programs, the way you do different things, trying to move yourself to the future, it'll change the way you think, okay? So it's not corporations, it's not universities, it's everybody together that is actually doing this. So let's start our journey. I mean, like I said, everybody's forgotten about the big corporate labs. They all disappeared in the United States, right? And now, we're already starting to see, wait a minute, universities can't do everything, right? There's a recent article in The Economist saying, wait a minute, these universities do a lot of crazy stuff that never goes anywhere, right? And so now we're starting to see a reaccumulating data saying universities don't do everything either, right? So I look at this as a corporate and university problem because we're swinging from whose responsibility is it, right? Whose responsibility is it to do the farther out stuff that's kind of hard, right? So that's why I call it the corporate and university research problem. So today, I want to work our way so that we understand what's the societal innovation process that's happening, and that is a different kind of thinking, but that allows you to understand how to participate in that. One of the other things I want to point out is why a single hierarchical enterprise, like a corporation or a university, cannot do it alone, right? So we'll cover that. And then I want to be able to tell you a little bit about SMART and SMART-Lease. SMART-Lease was a microelectronics program within SMART that has launched this startup company that I'm involved with, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about that. It's like a kind of quick story, but if you have any more questions, we can go into more detail and questions and answers. Okay, so groundwork. So I'm going to start leading you down this sort of garden path with very practical, known things, and then at the end, you'll be surprised that you're going to think about research, innovation, and how this all happens in a very different way. First, we got to get some language right. When I use the term innovation today, I'm talking about the whole process. So it's from, let's say, I'm thinking far out, like in a research project, all the way to market, right? That whole process. So sometimes people picture it as like an in-between stage between research and enterprise, but that's not how I'm using it. It's the whole process, okay? So that's really important. And innovation, it's not an innovation until it is in the marketplace, right? So if you go back when I was young, people use the word innovation like an idea, but over time, the way that people use the word has changed. If you look at today, governments, corporations, universities, they use the term innovation to represent, the impact that's happening in society, right? So that's how we're going to use it, right? That it's not an innovation if it was just an idea. That would be just a research result, or that would be an invention, or that could be, these different pieces along the way. But innovation means we've got to go through that whole process and then have something working in the marketplace, okay? So if there's one thing I want you to remember today, is that when we invest in the future, even in research, we haven't been thinking of all the elements required for us to have that impact in the market. And the way to show that we've been missing this, that we've only had a technology focus, is that this simple statement: the technology is implemented in the market, right? We know this to be true, right? That has to happen. And notice there's three parts. There's something new that we're doing, which we're calling technology here. There's something, somehow it has to be brought to a customer, to a user, and it has to be useful in the market, right? Very simple. But that tells us those are going to be our three innovation elements that we talked about today. Technology, which is general, right? Could be science, could be algorithms, could be whatever. Implementation means that I have to have a business model, I have to work with a supply chain, or I have to, whatever it is, I have to somehow get it into the customer's hands. And the market is that when it gets there, there's profit that can be generated, right? It's so useful that my input costs are lower than what I can price it at, right? So I color these things so that you can kind of, I'm going to use a model, so just keep in mind that technology is purple, implementation is green, and market is red. And we'll use that for the whole presentation. The other kind of graphical thing we're going to use is this. So when I'm thinking about an idea, I say, look, I have to have these three things have to come together, technology implemented in the market. Beforehand, of course, it hasn't been achieved, right? So that's this picture here. If I have a market, I have a technology implementation, I think that these three may come together, but they're not yet, right? So when they're apart like this, when I use this in this presentation, it means that I'm thinking of these three elements, but they haven't come together yet in an innovation. I don't know if they're going to come together. Now, it's natural to say, is there an attractive force of these three elements, right? And because otherwise, how could you have efficient innovation if these three things aren't attracted to each other for successful innovation? Of course, they are. That's what brings us together. So I have this technology, as I get out there, the market gets interested, I have to figure out how to deliver it, they come together, and I have a product, I'm making profit, and graphically in this presentation, when they come together like that, that's a successful innovation in the marketplace. Okay, so you want these ideas that we have, the market, implementation, technology, all come together and be a profitable product in the marketplace. So this attractive force, if you think about it, has to be there. Because if it weren't, we wouldn't be very efficient. If we just plugged different things together and we couldn't tell, until later, it'd be very inefficient. So in fact, whatever processes we do to try to create innovation, we want to be in environments where we can experiment with these different elements to come together. Maybe it's a new market, it could be a new technology, but I have to be out, and I have to be in an organization somewhere where I can feel that attractive force. I can't predict it. I have to be out there experimenting, right? So now let's talk with that kind of basic foundation and the way we're going to use the pictures. Let's think about the degree of innovation, right? So incremental innovation would be we're going to do small changes to produce a new product. So the way we can see that is, let's go back to our little model. I'm looking forward. I didn't bring MIT together yet. I want to, but I'm not quite sure which technology in the future. So let's say I'm looking out 1 to 2 years, and I have a current product, and I know my market, I know my implementation, I do that today. But what I'm doing is I'm going to look at a few technologies, and I don't know which one is going to go, but over 2 years, I'm going to invest money. That's the big stack of Benjamins right there. So I'm going to not show any more funding, because one of the things, the problem with innovation is that everybody gets focused on funds. And certainly for startups and all this sort of thing, yes, you need financing. But what we've done so many times in so many countries is we focus so much on financing, we don't look at the process that we're doing to try to do better at returning capital after that investment. So what I want to do today is, yes, we have to have mechanisms for moving things from the left to the right. Everything you see in this talk today, every time I talk about moving things from the left to the right, needs funding, right? But this will be the last time I mention it, because I'm going to focus on what we should be doing as opposed to focusing on just raising financing, all right? So boom, you're going to use that, and then after we explore one of those technologies indeed ends up being useful, and I combine it with a market implementation, and I end up with a new product with incremental innovation in the market. Those other technologies I explore, I still understand them. They go off to the side, but this particular technology fit in, and now I have a successful innovation. So this motion from left to right, remember at the beginning, they're apart, but then I experiment, I kind of see if they come together, I apply resources. It turns out one of the technologies combined with implementation serves that market, and then we have a successful innovation over on the right. Okay, so that's the incremental innovation, 1 to 2 years, right? So let's look at incremental innovation and what companies are comfortable with. So first of all, Incremental innovation is pretty much product level innovation. That story I just told you is we could have a market that we already know. We have implementation, right? Our company has a business model. And I want to experiment, let's say, with a new technology, right? So if you think about that, that's because I'm only letting one variable, the technology variable, because the other ones are already my company. I serve a particular market now, and I have a business model I use now to make money, right? So again, I'm going to have these three little color things come together when I have an innovation, but I want to talk about different kinds of incremental innovation right now. So this is the one we just did, right? We look forward and we're looking for attractive force between market and inflation technology. And I experiment with different technologies like I just showed. What I want to do here is use a particular product example, which is the MP3 player. Do you guys remember MP3 players?
Yeah.
Yeah, see, some of us are old enough to remember these things, right? Sorry to the young people here, but it's an important story to try to picture what it used to be like when everything wasn't in your phone, okay? So in the case of the old MP3 players, and you guys might remember a company in Singapore called Creative Technologies, right? They were successful in the early days, and they graduated trying to make MP3 players. There's many people making MP3 players, right? You hold your music on, play them back. But there was technology transitions during that time because the world progresses. And some of you may not realize that the first music players, one of the key things was that Hitachi was able to make small enough hard drives, and you could squeeze them into the MP3 player. So these small drives were the first technology that was in there for storage of music, okay? And so let's consider that the previous purple dot. So I have a hard drive that's in there, that's how I store my music, and I'm addressing the market for music players, right? However, silicon technology was improving all the time, costs were coming down, right? So people could see, well, wait a minute, I'm making a music player. When the silicon become cheap enough that I could have a solid state MP3 player, it'd be smaller, we get rid of the hard drive, right? So that's an example where as I look to the future, 1 to 2 years, I have to say, look, I got a current product, it's in the marketplace, and let's say I build and I sell MP3 players, but I'm gonna have to have a technology transition. I gotta play around and see, is silicon gonna be cheap enough? Can I get it into my MP3 player, right? So I have uncertainty in the technology domain pretty much, but everything else is fixed. I'm still selling MP3 players into the market that I know, and I'm still using the same business model, right? So that would be a technical evolution, technical incremental innovation in this space. So that's comfortable for companies because 2 of the 3 things are fixed, right? Because remember, when I'm doing a certain market, all of your marketing, all of your sales, they're all geared towards that market. So I'm very comfortable doing this. And then my business model, my company, everything, right, is geared towards that business model, whatever it is, right? So I'm very comfortable because I only have to, it's a little uncomfortable after trying this new technology, but overall I'm okay. Now, of course, there's another one that corporations like to do, which is that if I have a technology I'm already good at, again, I have my engineers, they already know that thing, and say business model, I try to find a new market for stuff I already have, right? So that's pretty clear too, right? Because you could say in the music player, that's finding a new audience or a new consumer for basically the same thing. Somebody mentioned the Sony Walkman. So it turns out that the Sony Walkman wasn't the first product. Sony was really good at this process in the 80s and 90s because they would put things out there and see if they have a combination, right? So one of the things they had first was something called the Pressman. The Pressman was for people in the media where you could record on a portable device and have interviews and stuff like that. Well, they realized, well, if I pull up the microphone, I have the same technology in there, and it's small enough now. Let's see if people like to carry their music. You put a CD CD-ROM in there. Yeah, what's a CD-ROM, right? And they could walk around with it. And that became one of the best products Sony ever made, which is Sony Walkman, right? So that is sort of the finding a new market for the same technology that you already had, right? So that's that. So of course, since you're all very good students, in that case, the technology implementation was fixed, and I changed only one thing, which is the market. Well, there's one left, right? You could keep, that's right, you could keep the technology market the same, but change green, which is implementation. Now that one, up until the internet started taking over brick and mortar stores, is a little bit, business model innovation was something people didn't notice for a long time, but that's what this is, right? Because you say, look, imagine an MP3 player. I sell so many of them, I have a huge reputation, but then I have friends in Southeast Asia that know more manufacturing than I'll ever know. So then I said, you know what, why am I doing this? My friend can do this for me. I already established that they love my software, they love my intellectual property. I'll just sell directly to them and I'll outsource my manufacturing, right? That's a change in business model, right? I just, instead of doing everything myself, I move some stuff away. It's the same technology, same market. It's just my operations are different, right? So, and of course, like I mentioned, the biggest change in our lifetime for this one is the internet, right? So when the internet finally became very capable, you know, you're selling the same thing, but I could go from a storefront to the internet. That's a shift in business model, right? So that's another example. So this is all incremental innovation, and this is comfortable for hierarchical organizations, because generally in any one of these, I'm only changing one thing. So my organization doesn't have to deal with uncertainty except for that one thing. And of course, I design my organization to be able to do that. So if I'm doing the technology one, I have my engineering department be able to take a little uncertainty in that technology space, right? That's fine because the rest of the organization can still operate. However, let's think about looking out a little bit further into the future like Apple did. Do you guys remember Apple iPod, right? They were not the first MP3 player. There was all sorts of devices out there. So the question is, how is it that Apple came along and all of a sudden, by not being first, how did they dominate? And the answer is that they didn't stick with only one uncertainty. They actually jumped out because they weren't a player in any of it. And what they did was they opened up space in multiple areas at the same time. Now, that means that if I take on so much uncertainty, it's going to require more work to see the attractive forces come together. So this is like a 3 to 5 year timeline. So we went from 1 to 2 years to 3 to 5. It makes sense that I have to increase uncertainty, right, in more spaces. Because if I look out 3 to 5 years, the markets are going to change, technology is going to change, other people do different technology, and the things like business models in the industry and supply chain are going to change, right? So if I actually don't increase my uncertainty, I'm saying, if I don't do that, I'm saying that I could predict the future. Of course, nobody can predict the future, right? If anybody can, let me know who you are, because I've got a good proposition for you, all right? So if I can't predict the future, I have to admit I have to have uncertainty. That's what Apple did here. And what is really great is that they said the music industry is in crisis, right? You guys don't remember, do you remember something called Napster? We all thought we were going to get all of our stuff for free forever. So did the music industry, by the way, right? So if you're Steve Jobs, you sit there and go, you know, I don't know how this is all going to work out. But if I make a device for MP3 playing, I'm going to make a device that serves my ability to take a bigger piece of the music industry than people think I can take, right? And the reason he can do that, he says, you know what? The fact they're under stress means their business model is up for grabs. They have uncertainty in their business model, right? So I'm going to consider that. I'm going to go to them. I don't have my device exactly figured out yet. but I'm gonna work with my designers and my suppliers, and I'm gonna understand all that uncertainty in technology space, and I'm gonna look at what the music industry might need. Make a long story short, over 3 to 5 years, out of those possible combinations, the 99-cent song comes about. Everybody's like, younger people like, what the hell is a 99-cent song, right? And what it was these music, the whole industry is nervous about their model. They're gonna get zero revenue. So this whole thing ended up, we're gonna design a little box, a little iPod, and it's gonna sell these things for 99 cents. Industry says, oh, there's a floor on my revenue. I don't lose this business completely. Jobs takes a piece of that action, and iPod is born, and it takes off, of course, because the combination of the design and technology and the change in business model, right? That is why it was able to come in late, because they took on a larger scale innovation, larger scale because it took uncertainty to more dimensions, right? So they weren't first, and they ended up changing. Also, in the end, they ended up growing the market because with the 99-cent song and the device, they were able to, of course, make it more friendly for more people. So, this statement here, I've already mentioned it. Now, let's think beyond 3 to 5 years, right? So I say, this enters the domain of universities and research today. It used to be the domain of Bell Labs, like I said, but we look out further. Based on everything I just said, should we just like look only at technology when I set up a long-term research program? Seems like not, because what about those other 2 elements I talked about? And they're going to be changing the whole time if I spend 5 to 10 years on research. So clearly I'll miss it if I only think about technology, right? So if we admit I can't predict the future, and I think further out, that means I have to take on even more uncertainty in each element, right? Now, how do you deal with this? So I'm going to change languages. One of the problems we do is we talk about basic research, applied research. That is a linear model that has been proven not to work, right? Because if you think about it, a linear model where we go from research to like development to production means that the people at the beginning of that process have to be able to predict the future. That's what that means. Now, of course, we're all organized to do this, which is ridiculous. And it's like we're searching for the person. All right, which is the best researcher that can predict the future? And it's so dumb, it's unbelievable, right? Because nobody can. So we're not even doing processes that take into account our own inability to control the future reality, right? So I got to change language here. I'm going to call this new way of thinking about long-term R&D fundamental innovation R&D. And it's to get rid of the old language of the linear model, okay? So fundamental innovation R&D is not about predicting the future. So what we know is if I look at a project I'm trying to go 5 to 10 years to get a bigger innovation, what I know is that markets are going to change. Like whatever market I think is happening today, it's not going to be the same. I mean, it could be, but there'll be new markets, old markets will disappear. There's going to be change, right? Well, of course, something we are a little more comfortable with, technology is going to change for sure, right? Technology will come and go, and if you don't believe that, look at, we were just talking about before this presentation, about how, large language models, right? I mean, wow, all of a sudden, that's here, right? You would have never predicted that. So, and then implementation is also changing, right? You could have new countries appear that take on supply chain. You could have changes in business models because of that, right? Those things change. Now, the response of people who are responsible for doing research that far ahead of time, because it's all sort of risky, right, is these 2 things. So, and I know this because, of course, I've been in all these environments. So, one strategy is you pick the thing everybody's worried about today, whether it's M, I, or T, right? And you say, yes, 10 years ahead of time, I know your pain point. You really care about this so much. And And you're right, I'm gonna work on that for 10 years. And of course, you'll get funding, but you're guaranteed you fail because you just selected, you have no uncertainty. You're taking something someone is sensitive about today and saying that thing is gonna be just as important 10 years in the future, let's say, right? Now, of course, you get funding that way, but you're gonna miss innovation because there's too much uncertainty in the world and you're not thinking broadly enough. But it's a strategy for a researcher, right? Another one is to say, this is way more popular in universities, is you say, Professor Fitzgerald, it's always so very confusing. Nobody can predict the future. You're right. So just give me my money and I'll only focus on technology, right? That is the classic academic response, right? So, of course, this induces the problem, well, how do I know what technology should work on, given the uncertainties of the future? But the response is, well, that's your problem. That's not my problem, right? So, well, if you do either one of these things, you will arrive at failure. Guarantees failure, right? So, what is fundamental innovation? This is really important. If you look back at Bell Labs, even though this kind of refinement of thinking wasn't there at the time, what long-term fundamental innovation about, and the reason it can be so productive, is it's actually a search for value, right? Think about it, it has to be a search. If you have uncertainty, where it says you move forward, and you're the one collecting information, and I'm investing in research, I get more resolve, I reduce uncertainty in the T space, the technology space, I now can see what else is happening in the world. And what I'm doing is I steer our process, all of our work, towards this thing that starts to form, and then I hit the target, right? It's a search for value in the world. And we don't train anybody for this. This is what universities should be doing exclusively. I mean, for a place like MIT or your lead technology university, they should be teaching people to really do very advanced things in the science and engineering, but then in the context of these other variables, as they keep on getting into it, and they steer towards value as the world changes and as the research results come in. That's the big difference. And it's something that's in between the two extremes, these two other choices I just mentioned, that people are comfortable with. It's very uncomfortable to do this because you're constantly moving forward, admitting that I don't really know exactly. And so, with the companies I founded, it's always like that. Everybody's always telling you, well, you don't know this, you don't know that. It's like, yeah, well, we have to move forward, right? It's very uncomfortable for most people, right? All right, so let's talk about fundamental innovation. So it's this long-term thing. I need to increase the uncertainty because I can't predict the future. So I have to make a wider set. Again, not infinite, not zero. I have to make it some intermediate thing. And so at the beginning of my research program, I have to do this. I have to say, you know what, there's a set of science and technology that if you were able to understand it over time, is so important that there's a range of applications that it can go into. I can't tell which one yet, because some of these are new markets. Remember, it's not just the markets that you have today. That's easy, again, from a company point of view, because I identify these markets with like a certain addressable market size. But really, there's new markets that you can induce from this activity, right? So there's some uncertainty, but I know that this technology that we're going to investigate science is so applicable to so many things that there's a wide set of markets and future markets to address. And implementation, same thing, that I can picture kind of how it might be delivered today, but I know some things are changing, and so there's some uncertainty there. Now, the white dots suggest, like I was saying, that you can create new things, whether it's a new market, but also new technology. So the advantage is that if you're further out, in 5 to 10 years, not only do I have to open up the uncertainties, but I have the opportunity to create new pieces that don't exist today. And that could cause convergence in a new white space area that I didn't have before, right? So that's kind of why you want to invest in long-term research, is that you like to be able to create new white dots that allow this process to converge on new innovations in the marketplace 5 to 10 years later, right? This kind of thinking, I can tell you, almost nobody, except for, even at MIT, I'd say they're, of course, the most successful professors are doing this in their head, they just haven't laid it out like this. But the vast majority of people don't launch research projects like this. At Bell Labs, you couldn't help launch in this way because of the way the place was, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But this is kind of a thing that's been very productive underneath society for quite a long time that we have to think about. It only makes sense, right? Because society has other variables. It's got market implementation. It just doesn't have science and technology. So obviously they're going to have to come together at the end, right? So again, if you kind of put that all together, it kind of says incremental innovation, the iPod example, 3 to 5 years, and then the long-term research innovation, fundamental innovation, they're all the same process. It's just that the further out that I look into the future, the more uncertainty I have to take in each element, right? So again, if I look to the, if I look further to the left here and then try to bring it back, that's further out in time, right? So if I look only a little bit into the future, we talked about this is the incremental, right? And incremental innovation, by the way, which companies love, the reason it's hard to stay ahead is that it's pretty obvious, right? If I keep two things fixed, then the range of the uncertainty that I'm looking at, probably everybody else is looking at too. And sure, you have to do that, but it's sort of like, if you're an individual that wants to invest their time, the truth is, if you don't do it, someone's going to do it anyway, right? That's the next logical step, right? The iPod example, I try to show you that out 3 to 5 years is a fundamental difference, which is that you have to think about the system. Remember, in order to introduce uncertainty into implementation and market and technology like we talked about for the iPod, you have to be thinking about the whole system. We have to be thinking about the music industry, not just our device, right? So that's what I mean about system level. The further out, not only do you have to introduce uncertainty, but it means by definition, you're looking at the system level, not just like the product level, right? And then, when I go the farthest out, that's system level understanding of how I want to launch towards trying to do something really innovative in a particular area, but I can create the white dots. I have the ability to now produce new things because I got time, right? I have longer time. I can actually produce new pieces that allow us to converge into some new ideas, okay? So that's kind of the sort of, this global upstream intelligence, the reason I call it that is that as I look forward and I want to launch these long-term projects, you have to think about it in a global context. It can't just be like, I'm just going to go talk to my local university. I have to be looking everywhere in order to understand the range of those 3 uncertainties, right? It's not just what I have in my company. It's not just what I have in my country. It's what's in existence in the globe, right? All right. Why is this so hard to do inside a company or inside a university? So on the left is an operational efficient organization. Now some of you probably laugh because you say universities are operation efficient, and in fact they aren't. They're efficient at producing students, which is what their main goal is, right? And the companies are efficient at creating financial results, right? So what you do is you have tools you use in both organizations, hierarchical organizations, where you've divided labor so you could be efficient at that task. So university, the task is to educate students, right? So I figure out how to divide that up, division of labor, which is a classic economic thing. That's why you have a hierarchical organization. We use subject matter expertise. We measure outcomes. And what we work on are things that are kind of mostly confined, and we like to have one variable or at most 2 variables. And we apply the organizational knowledge so that we can arrive at the answer-driven linear thing, right? That's what we do. Because in a way, you've already found innovation from before, which allows you to do what you're doing, and we have to organize ourselves with these tools to produce as much profit if you're a company or as many students as possible in your university. The problem is that process I just described to you before is very hard to do beyond the incremental stage for these organizations. And the reason is because what do you need? Well, on the right, We have to always create new tools. All of this progress ends up creating new tools. That's why you have innovation. And when I say tool here, it's a general tool, not like a physical tool, of course, right? So if you think about that process with that uncertainty, with so many domains involved, I have to have collaboration and integration across many fields, right? I have to look at multiple disciplines, and I have to have people that can drill down at the beginning of that process in different areas to start to understand things. You don't have to drill deep everywhere, but I do have to initially drill around so I can figure out those ranges of like market application technology, right? And because it's long term, I have to focus on process. I can't look at outcome. Outcome is far away, right? So I have to say, am I doing a process that's learning? Am I reducing over time those uncertainties? And will I be able to steer it toward its conclusion, right? And you have multiple parameter space, right? It's not mostly fixed. And so a lot of what you're trying to do is figure out what are the right questions to ask so that I can move forward in the right way and steer towards that future. So it's a nonlinear and question-driven process, right? So the reason I call it a third place in the blue letters in the upper right is that if you create a different place where everybody can come together to focus on this process, then you can do long-term innovation together. And in fact, that's what SMART is in Singapore. Okay? So, long-term R&D investment to understand what we've been doing. If you look the long-term R&D, there's different investment categories. So for example, if you think about someone in real estate, there's commercial real estate, there's residential real estate, there's different categories for investment, right? What we've been doing at R&D is we've been saying like all R&D is the same, and we have this linear model where if I go out far enough, right, then that's basic research. What I've done here is say, look, there's actually all these things are 10-year timelines, right? But they're different processes. So the first one I'm calling altruistic science, right? That's generally at the university, I want to produce a student, so I create a research project to create a student. And generally it creates a new piece of knowledge. It just creates a purple dot, right? That's it. That's the only goal. There's no green, there's no red, right? Sometimes you have strategic projects. I want to develop offshore drilling for companies to come. So as a country, I've got to invest in some stuff. Or in defense, I want to produce a new F-35, right? That's called strategic research, where I have multiple technology domains that I have to look at with uncertainty. But at the end, I already know the customer, it's the government, and I'm removing kind of the normal forces because I have cost plus and things like that that allow me to drive this conclusion regardless of whether it's profitable or not, right? So fundamental innovation is inherently different because you're thinking about all three things in society from the very beginning. And by the way, the modern data on this shows that if you think you're going to get fundamental innovation from investing in altruistic and strategic, the answer is no. The spillover effects, which is an economist uses the word spillover effect. If I invest in one area, I will automatically get it in the other. And everybody does this, and of course the results worldwide are the same. You can invest as much as you want in altruistic science and in strategic things, and you won't get fundamental innovation unless it's operating in your society, right? So it's super important to say, look, I'm going to invest, if I'm the government, I'll invest in altruistic science, I'll invest in strategic, I invest in fundamental innovation, but I should know each one, what I'm looking for, and what the investment is for, right? Instead, today we conflate all of them together and just say, oh, there's some sort of long-term investment. So if we break that down a little clearer to see who's doing what, so altruistic science, the innovation element, you're only exploring technology. The output is what we call academic currency, which is like patents and academic papers. Universities generally do this today, and it's usually small individuals, small teams, right? A few people or one person. Strategic research, again, is only technology element. I'm after a technological system typically. Governments or corporations do this, and it's teams of experts mostly that do this, teams of experts in those technologies. Fundamental innovation that we've been talking about here, which is the only one that brings economic growth, by the way. The other ones are losses, right? That requires all three elements to be thought of constantly in some organization as you go through this 5 to 10 years. The goal is economic growth, and it's a societal process. Remember, when I show these bubbles with those different colors, remember, if I'm the innovator that's activated, the way I get that is, I'm going to talk to people with different applications, right? That's people that are in society. When I go to try to figure out, can I have it made to bring to them, even when I'm in the research stage, I'm going to talk to people about, well, how do you manufacture these things, right? So this is a societal process, right? Not an abstracted one where I'm in a closet by myself, right? So, and typically new enterprises are doing this because they can feel the MIT force is stronger than anyone else. They're not limited to any market or implementation of technology by being in a hierarchy. They can explore all possibilities, right? I mean, if you're a good enterprise. So now that we have this model, we can kind of look back and say, why have these things not worked out? So here I mentioned university. I create a dot because I create a research project to create a PhD student. My goal is to create a human resource, not to create innovation, right? It's not to create fundamental innovation. So then I'm surprised when I'm really a smart professor and I created this great, deepening of understanding my field, and I created a PhD, but then that research project where I look out to the world, nobody cares, right? So no convergence, right? So that's it. Now Bell Labs, we'll forget that. So what's wrong with university? There's lack of application-rich and worldly implementation environment. In other words, if you think about it, what a corporation can bring to the university are those elements, right? That's why it's a big collaborative process. Of course, the problem is the corporation usually brings also a very narrowing of market and what they're interested in, which is the problem of why that's not a very good thing, right? But now with Bell Labs, at the beginning, we made everything from transistors to computer systems to long-distance network. So in the field of information science, the reason Bell Lab invented everything is because we had all three things sitting right there. I used to go to lunch, and I'd be sitting there working on new semiconductor devices, and there'd be somebody next to me trying to make integrated circuits in the fab, or they're building a new telecom system, or whatever. So in this unusual environment, we had all three, and they were wide open, because how often does a company have so many different markets they're playing in? It's because AT&T was a monopoly, and it did lots of things that wasn't based on their profit at the time, right? So the strange thing was, it was great for these initial ideas. You invent almost anything, right? And they're valuable because you got all three elements operating. You're not just thinking about science and technology. So you can actually get close, and that's what happened to me. We measured something, if you guys are familiar with semiconductors, we invented in Bell Labs technology called strained silicon. It's where you put silicon under stress, and it makes the transistor perform much better. And that technology is now in every one of your phone, every chip in your phone. We brought it to market in 2000, well, before 2004, Intel brought it to market in 2004, and we had a little patent battle. But the bottom line is that was measured at Bell Labs at 4 Kelvin, very cold temperature, showing the promise that you could change circuits in the future, but obviously it's going to be a long road. However, when I got excited by that, and I went to the organization, AT&T, sure, Bell Labs is kind of a separate place in a sense, right? It's its own walled garden, but it benefited from all this information coming from AT&T. Well, what was AT&T's business back then? Long-distance communication, that's what it was. So I told my manager, who was a physicist, I said, this stuff's going to change CMOS. It's going to change all silicon integrated circuits. How do I move it further? And he goes, I don't know, go talk to the marketing guys, right? So so I go out to AT&T, and of course what I discover is that the entire company is focused on one market area, which is long distance service. And I'm this guy talking about new chips that are going to change the world, and they're like, yeah, please go away, right? I don't want to talk to you. And so remember, AT&T has a particular business model, that's why you see it's a single green dot and a single red dot, because red dot is a long distance telecom service, right? So I can't move with enough uncertainty in red and green to arrive at the market. I can't change the business model, I can't change the market. So, of course, it doesn't converge there, and then I go to MIT. So I left AT&T, and at MIT I can now open up red and green. So we should have a second, but application-rich environment, that was the best thing about Bell Labs, right? So many different applications, right? There's an absorption problem because the rest of the company had a singular market, right? That's all they were really doing, so a lot of stuff we produced couldn't pass through that filter. But there's no operation efficient management for that business on the Bell Labs side, so you could let this thing run around and produce all this innovation. But it wasn't innovation actually because you didn't get it to market. So it's the beginning of the innovation process, right? So by going to MIT, I could open up the red and the green.